Now, I'm going to turn it over to the program. Dr. Kip Kussman, Dean of Students of MSOE, will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Leslie. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. The pleasure is all mine to introduce to you today's guest speaker with us. In September 2019, thanks to a generous $34 million gift from MSOE Regent and alumnus, Dr. Dwight Derricks and his wife, Diane, MSOE opened the Dwight and Diane Derricks Computational Science Hall and launched a new Bachelor of Science degree in computer science with a concentration in applied artificial intelligence. This transformational gift helped position MSOE at the forefront of AI education. In a few short years, the computer science program has grown into one of the university's largest, and the momentum from that gift continues today. On March 1st, 2023, Dr. Jeremy Kedziora was named the People Power Endowed Chair in Artificial Intelligence at Milwaukee School of Engineering. Kedziora is an award-winning researcher and scientist with 17 years of experience developing new methods in machine learning. Also Bayesian, I always say this wrong, Bayesian inference and game theory. Previously, he was a director of data science and analytics at Northwestern Mutual, where he managed the development of machine learning and modeling efforts focused on cybersecurity. Prior to that, he led product development at financial tech startup Giant Oak, where he focused on natural language processing. He also served for 9 years at the Central Intelligence Agency as chief methodologist, where he led applied R&D efforts in data science and modeling. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester and a BS in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He has also taught at the University of Wisconsin and serves as an advisor to multiple fintech startups. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in warmly welcoming to the stage Dr. Jeremy Kedziora.
Okay, thank you very much, Kip, for that introduction. As Kip said, I am Jeremy Kedziora. I am People Power Endowed Chair of Artificial Intelligence at MSOE. And what that means is that I spend my days teaching and conducting scientific research on topics related to AI and machine learning and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about AI. And I think AI is one of those things that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So unless you spend a few minutes to kind of pin down what you're talking about, it ends up meaning nothing at all. What I'm going to try and do today is give you my sense of AI as a scientist and a researcher, and then at the end we'll violate the laws of live talks and try and do a demo. We'll see if that works or not. Okay, so what is AI? So hopefully at least some folks in the audience will have seen the movie Iron Man, so this kind of analogy lands, right? So in the movie Iron Man, you've got fast-talking genius billionaire Tony Stark, right, who builds the Iron Man suit. The thing is, though, that Tony doesn't build the Iron Man suit by himself. He has help. And in particular, he has the help of an artificial intelligence named Jarvis that Tony created. If you watch Iron Man, you'll see Jarvis and Tony interact with each other. They speak to each other. Tony gives Jarvis tasks to do, and Jarvis does them. And so if you look at this, right, as a person who does, kind of machine learning and AI and stuff like that, the implication is that something like Jarvis, fictitious though it might be, must be the composition of many different AI systems welded together into some sort of seamless, coherent whole, right? So for example, Jarvis recognizes Tony's face. So Jarvis is doing facial recognition. Jarvis understands Tony's speech. So Jarvis is doing speech recognition. Jarvis responds to Tony in natural spoken language. So Jarvis is doing generative natural language processing, which is going to be an important one that we'll come back to when we talk about ChatGPT. And that the list goes on. And I think when people think about the promise of artificial intelligence, this is what they have in mind. They have in mind, right, the benign, helpful, knowledgeable assistant that can increase your productivity like 100-fold when you work with it. Right, so that's one end of the spectrum. That's the good end. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got something like this, right? You've got HAL 9000, infamously murderous AI from 2001 Space Odyssey, right? And if you watch 2001, you will see HAL is on the spaceship with the astronauts. The astronauts and HAL talk to each other, just like Jarvis and Tony. HAL does tasks the astronauts ask Jarvis to do, before he kills them. And the implication is if you watch 2001 and you see HAL does many of the same things that Jarvis does. And so, again, fictitiously, HAL must also be the composition of many different AI systems. I think when people worry about the threat of AI and they call for moratoria on the development of AI systems, right, or they speculate about AI extinction events, this is what they have in mind, right? They have the murderous rogue AI accidentally created by the law of unintended consequences. So that's the spectrum, right? You've got Jarvis, you've got HAL. And what I tell you is that today, right, both Jarvis and HAL are kind of examples of what a researcher in the field would term an artificial general intelligence. Today we have nothing like this. There is no such thing as an artificial general intelligence that I'm aware of. No one's come close to creating one. What we have today is ChatGPT, right? So for those who are unfamiliar with ChatGPT is like a text-based AI, and you can go to OpenAI's website, you can type in some text and ChatGPT will respond to you. And here's an example that's quite hard to read, but what I've said here is, hi, ChatGPT, introduce yourself, and ChatGPT responded by generating some text. So if I compare ChatGPT to Jarvis and HAL, right? Jarvis and HAL, fictitious though they are examples where you have many different AI systems welded together into a seamless, coherent whole. They do lots of things. ChatGPT does exactly one thing. The one and only thing that it does is generative natural language processing, right? So, ChatGPT can't see you, can't hear you, doesn't have thoughts or knowledge or preferences or anything like that. It does not have levers to pull. If it had levers, it wouldn't know what to do with them. And in fact, it wouldn't even know how to learn what to do with levers if it had them to pull. Right? So by contrast, right, compared to fictitious examples of artificial general intelligence like Jarvis and HAL, something like ChatGPT is extremely limited and not in any sense a close approximation or an example of an artificial general intelligence. Right, so there we have it, right? We have the spectrum of the possible in the future, the reality of now. Let's talk now a little bit about the history of AI. Right, so a couple lessons I want to kind of leave you with here. The first of which is that artificial intelligence is not new. And in fact, in many ways, artificial intelligence, just like nuclear weapons, is actually a World War II era technology. The first people who started doing work that was called artificial intelligence started doing that work in the late 40s and early 50s. And at the time, they would have thought of AI, as you can see up there, as any technique which enables computers to mimic human behavior. Probably one of the most famous examples of AI that came out of this era was that somebody taught a computer to play checkers like pretty credibly, pretty effectively. So fast forward 30 years, and now it's the 1980s. There have been massive increases in computing power, and debugging is no longer kind of a literal thing. And that has allowed researchers to focus very heavily on a subfield of AI called machine learning. Right? So in machine learning, what you do is you give computers data, you tell them how to learn from the data, but you don't tell them what to learn. And they learn independently from the data that you've supplied them. That was extremely fruitful in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. But then again, 30 years have passed. There have been massive increases in computing power and also significant innovation on the underlying mathematics, right, used in these kinds of modeling approaches. Right? And that has led to a focus beginning in kind of the 2010s and continuing up to the present on a particular kind of machine learning called deep learning. If you read in the newspaper about a computer that can recognize objects within images or read a book, that's almost certainly a deep learning driven capability. There's tons of examples of each of these. An example of an artificial intelligence that does not involve deep learning would be like a rules-based chatbot. So like an example might be like a group of people gets together and writes down a bunch of rules and the AI simply follows those rules. My own kind of research in grad school on game theory would have fallen into this AI but not machine learning category. Machine learning, right, there are tens of thousands of examples of artificial intelligence machine learning capabilities. And I have a kind of a short list here that I brainstormed when I was putting this together. My favorite kind of entry on that short list is the last one, scientific research, because I think it really underscores, again, the point that AI is not new. Scientists have been using AI in their research for 200 years. Ever since Gauss in the early 19th century used a really simple machine learning model to predict planetary motion. And actually, Gauss's model is one of the first ones you would still reach for today if you were going to do machine learning. And then an example of deep learning, right? I think a great example of deep learning is ChatGPT itself. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So AI is not new. In many ways, fundamentally World War II era technology. Second lesson I want to leave you with is that AI is not new in the sense that machine learning-based artificial intelligence is already absolutely pervasive. You just don't see it very often, right? And I think if you want a lesson in that, just look no further than something like this, right? This is my phone, right? So when I expose my face to my phone, it'll unlock. The reason that it does that is because there's almost certainly some sort of convolutional neural network or transformer-based deep learning model on my phone that can do image recognition. When I wave my phone around, the accelerometer in my phone is generating data, right? And there's a machine learning model that works on that data and makes the decision about whether or not to light the screen. When I'm texting somebody, I can do voice to text, right? And so my phone has the ability to take my audio waveform that I'm creating right now as I'm speaking to you and turn that into written words. Again, that's another machine learning model. And on and on and on. Right? So you might look at something like this and say to yourself, well, Jeremy, I see that you have a single platform with many AI capabilities in it, right? Doesn't that look a little bit like Jarvis and Hal? And I would say the answer is no, right? For two reasons. First of all, there is very little attempt made to link these individual AI machine learning capabilities together into a single cohesive whole. Right? These systems on my phone and your phones largely operate independently of each other. Siri might be Apple's sort of attempt to do that, but with all due respect to Apple's engineers, I think Siri's capabilities are quite limited. The second reason I think this is not in any sense approaching an artificial general intelligence is that each of these individual models works pretty unevenly. Like I sort of expect my phone to regularly mess things up. Right? Whereas the way Jarvis and Hal are depicted as fictitious artificial general intelligences is as like epitomes of absolute perfection. And in fact, it's when Hal makes a mistake that the astronauts kind of realize, oh, something's not right here. So ML-based AI, absolutely already pervasive, right? But still not anything approaching an artificial general intelligence. All right, but AI is having a moment, right? I've argued AI is not new, but it is having a moment, right? So why is it having a moment? I would say it's having a moment because a particular kind of AI called generative AI has really entered the public consciousness because it's been made very accessible. Right? So let's talk a little bit about generative AI, and then we'll talk a little bit about ChatGPT. So I just said a minute ago that machine learning is a form of AI that learns from data. Right? You give it data, and you tell it how to learn, and it will learn stuff without you telling it what to learn. Generative AI is a form of machine learning that uses that learning to create new content. Usually when we think about generative AI, the tasks that we like it to do would fall into three kind of buckets: transformation, generation, or prediction. Right, so an example of transformation might be like you take a complicated phenomenon and you write out an explanation of it, and then you say, Mr. Generative AI, please rewrite this for a fifth grader. An example of generation might be, I'll give a generative AI a short text description and I'll ask it to create something that's consistent with that text description. And an example of prediction might be like, here's an image and I have some missing stuff in that image. Please, generative AI, fill in the gaps for me. That last one, I think, is one you actually see depicted in pop culture all the time. Like if you've ever seen a police procedural show and, the investigator has this like grainy bad image of the bad guy and goes down to the tech lab and says, enhance, right? And then the tech guy does it, and all of a sudden there's this crystal clear image, right? The way that would work in the real world is that you'd use a denoising deep learning algorithm, which is a form of generative AI to do that job. In general, generative AI is going to require a user-provided prompt, can't take action by itself, and then it will create content in a way that's consistent with that prompt. So let me give you a non-ChatGPT example of this, right? Check out that castle on the right there. That's an AI-generated image. What I did to create that was I gave a generative AI a text prompt, and that prompt is at the bottom there, right? So I said, castle perched atop a rock overlooking the ocean, hidden in a valley with mountains, blah, 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 blah. And the AI built that, generated it for me. So I took a look at this and I said, all right, this is pretty nice, but look, spring is actually not my favorite time of year, and those look like spring blossoms to me. I prefer fall. So I added to this prompt one word. I added the word autumn at the end and asked it to regenerate the image, and it created that. Right? So it stripped away all the spring blossoms and replaced it with fall foliage. Another AI-generated image. And I thought this was pretty nice, but then I thought, well, what else you got, generative AI? Make it again for me. And it produced this. And so you can see each of these three images, all of them created by generative AI, have this particular style to them, like an artistic, almost cartoony style. So I thought, well, this is okay, right? But maybe I'm interested in something maybe a bit more photorealistic. So what I did was I took my generative AI model that's good at producing these artistic, cartoony-esque looking images, and I swapped it out for one that's been taught how to do photorealism. Gave it the same prompt, and it made this. And I would be challenged to point to anything in this picture that says to me that this is AI generated. Right? So this is an example of what generative AI can do, right? Create kind of images. The form of generative AI used to do this, by the way, is called Stable Diffusion, and it's like readily available. You can download a GUI, right, and work with it yourself. It's open source. So what about ChatGPT, right? That's the famous one these days. ChatGPT is based on something called a large language model. The particular large language model that underlies ChatGPT is called GPT 3.5, and GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which is a specific kind of deep learning model. So how does a large language model work? Well, what you do with a large language model is you give it like 1 billion documents, give it a whole bunch of documents, and it will learn from those documents. It'll learn how to represent the words in those documents as numbers, and in doing so, it will have created a compressed copy of the 1 billion documents that you started from. And once you've created that compressed copy, you've built your large language model, well, then you can start to do things with that large language model. For example, you could give the large language model a prompt, and what it will do is it will search the compressed copy of the 1 billion documents that was used to create it for something that's close to the prompt. And then ultimately, it'll return the closest thing back to you as the created content. So a couple implications that follow from this immediately. I'll make a little public service announcement here about that. First, large language models really cannot go beyond the data that were used to create them. So no one really knows, because OpenAI has kept ChatGPT proprietary, but it is thought that ChatGPT was created on about 1 billion documents comprised of web text and books. So if what you're asking ChatGPT to do is not well represented in those 1 billion documents, it will not do a good job of returning something to you. A great example of that is arithmetic, actually. So single-digit arithmetic is pretty common in the 1 billion documents that ChatGPT was trained on. 20-digit arithmetic is not. And so if you ask ChatGPT to do arithmetic operations, it will under certain circumstances, it will struggle. And I don't have kind of scientific analysis of GPT 3.5, but people did analyze 3.0. And they found that in general, 3.0, GPT 3.5's predecessor, got arithmetic operations right about 40% of the time or less. And it's a consequence of those kinds of things not being well represented in the corpus that it was trained on. So LLMs don't go beyond the data effectively that they were built on. Second public service announcement is that the information that's been encoded in a large language model will actually always be a little bit worse than what you could get out of an internet search. Right? So when you use ChatGPT and you prompt it, right, it looks amazing, right? It looks like it's synthesizing all these diverse sources and it's paraphrasing stuff, and wow, it's so smart. Actually, that's a consequence of the fact that it created a compressed copy of the text, right? Which is a euphemistic, nice way to say that it forgot stuff. It threw information away when it was created. It actually has no choice but to paraphrase things. And so it's ironic to me, the very reason why it looks so smart is actually a consequence of it being sort of a little bit dumber than the text it was used to create it. And if you want to verify that for yourself, you can go and ask it, hey, ChatGPT, please quote for me like the 5th paragraph on page 10 of Huckleberry Finn. And it will probably not be able to do it because it doesn't retain, the information that it was used to create it. Contrast that with a Google search. You do a Google search, you will get documents back verbatim. And that's because Google does not compress text in the same way. Third public service announcement for the security-minded folks right here. In general, people often operate large language models in a fixed capacity. So GPT 3.5 does not change when you prompt it. It's thought to be comprised of about 175 billion parameters. Those parameters do not change. They are fixed. They are constant. And what that means is that there is no reason why a large language model needs to retain proprietary or confidential information. It should be perfectly possible to build a large language model system and a ChatGPT-like capability that doesn't compromise the confidentiality of your data or your information when you use it. Now, OpenAI may choose to do that, right? They may choose to retain prompts if you give them to OpenAI, but that's a policy choice, right? That's not an intrinsic feature of how a large language model must work. Okay, so do I dare try this? I'm gonna try this. We'll see what happens here. Let me see if I can get on my phone here to use ChatGPT. Or I can try it with the local network. We'll see if that works. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to just like show you, because I think it's quite powerful. If you had never used it before, I wanted to show you what ChatGPT is capable of. And I have a backup if this doesn't work, which it seems like it's not going to. All right, well, there's another public service announcement. ChatGPT's servers are sometimes a little bit dicey. Okay, so let's suppose that you're, and I'm sure everybody in this room is way past this point in life, but let's suppose you're like fresh out of school, right, and you're at a new job, and you really want a vacation, right? You want to ask your boss for a vacation, but you're a little intimidated, so you think to yourself, all right, I'm going to offload this. I'm going to have ChatGPT write an email to my boss for me, ask for vacation. So what you could do is something like this. You could take ChatGPT and say, I want you to act as my personal assistant. Please write an informal email of no more than 100 words to my boss asking for a week of vacation. Use a friendly tone and do not justify the request, right? And when I entered this prompt earlier today, this is what ChatGPT generated in response, right? It generated this, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to drop you a quick note to request some time off. I would love to take a week of vacation, blah, 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 blah. And it took all of like 10 seconds to do this. So that's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward. You could kind of offload these sort of menial administrative tasks if you want to. So let me give you another one, right? Let's do something a little more in depth. Let's say you want to start exercising. You don't exercise now, but you want to get in shape. You don't know anything about exercise or how to put a workout program together. And you know, maybe you think, I shouldn't need to pay for this. I don't need to hire a trainer to do this for me. This information should be available, right? So you turn to ChatGPT and you say, I want you to act as a personal trainer. I will provide you with all the information needed about an individual looking to become fitter, stronger, and healthier through physical training. And then at the end of this, you say, my first request is, I need help designing a calisthenics exercise program for someone who wants to gain strength. So I did this earlier today, and ChatGPT responded with the bottom there and said, certainly I can help you design, this exercise program. And then what does it do? It asks me questions. Rather than spewing, stuff kind of mindlessly, it seeks to clarify the request that I've made. It asks me, hey, are you a beginner, an intermediate, or advanced? How much time do you have? Do you have equipment? Are you injured? What are your goals? Right? And so I thought, all right, that's great. Let me answer ChatGPT's questions, and we'll see what it responds with. And so I said, look, this person is intermediate. They'll be training at home. They will train 5 days a week for 1 hour. They want to do one-arm pull-ups, which is a real thing. I had to look that up. And they have no injuries, right? So I gave ChatGPT this, and it generated this, and actually quite a lot more that was off screen. I couldn't screenshot it all. But if you look at it, right, with a critical eye, it does try to encode the idea of progress toward this specific goal that you set for one-arm pull-ups. All right, let me do one more thing, another kind of public service announcement type thing. Yeah, I think I'm okay still. Okay, so last thing I'll show you, and I won't generate this live, or maybe I won't be able to do it. All right, well, the last thing I wanted to show you was think about a situation in which you have to do something and correctness and truth is important, right? So what I asked it to do that I can't show you because it's off screen is to prove a mathematical theorem, right? So mathematical theorem, super important that it's correct. If it's not correct, you don't have a proof and you don't have a result, and you can't publish it, and that makes you sad if you're a researcher. So I asked ChatGPT to prove a very famous theorem from economics called Arrow's theorem. It's 50, 60 years old. It won the Nobel Prize for its contribution. ChatGPT took my request, generated authoritative-looking text, that was completely incorrect. It was so incorrect that I couldn't even have edited it to make it correct. I would have had to scrap the whole thing and start over. But it looked good, looked authoritative, and if you didn't know any better, right, you might be tempted to proceed. So the lesson there is, if you're going to do something with ChatGPT in which truth and correctness is important, you'd better be a subject matter expert in the domain yourself. Okay, let me kind of finish up here, right? So two things that I want to do before we conclude. First, for the curious, how was ChatGPT built? Well, as I said, researchers gave it like 1 billion documents, and they asked it to solve problems like this. They took the documents, they took the sentences in the documents, they blanked out words, and they asked ChatGPT to learn how to fill in the blanks. Right? What blank is missing from this blank? Paris is the heart of blank. So you can think about how you might do this, right? Here's one example of how you could fill in the blanks, right? What word is missing from this sentence? Paris is the heart of France, right? ChatGPT learned how to do this across 1 billion documents, and it learned how to do it pretty effectively. And when you use ChatGPT, when you give it a prompt and you see it generating text sequentially across the screen, which I would love to be able to show you, but the internet's not cooperating, what ChatGPT is doing is repeatedly solving that last problem, where it's got a sentence with a blank at the end, and it fills in the blank. Right? So you give it a prompt and it says, okay, what's the most likely word that should follow this prompt? Excellent, I'll use that. Now I've got the prompt in the first word. What's the second most likely word that should follow? Great, I've got the prompt in the first word and the second word. What's the third word? And it does this sequentially and repeatedly, again, solving this last sentence with the blank at the end a bunch of times. I don't want to trivialize what ChatGPT does, right? What it learned how to do, right? This is non-trivial stuff. If you look at that last sentence, right, Paris is the heart of France could just as well be Paris is the heart of Europe. And if you're a Francophile, could just as well be Paris is the heart of culture. ChatGPT learned how to manage these choices across the entirety of the English language, which has tens of thousands of words. I think it's 1 million plus words with tens of thousands used commonly. Okay, so final thoughts here, right? If you wanted to start using AI, right, let me just offer like kind of my thoughts on how to do that effectively, right? How would you start? First of all, I would advocate for starting specific. If you want to start using AI, find things that annoy you, right? Generate a list of things that are irritating and use AI to fix some small specific thing off that list. Right, so I had breakfast with a management consulting CEO from the Milwaukee area, and he told me this anecdote where he said they had a spreadsheet process that took them days per week to run. And this was annoying, right? So they used ChatGPT to build an automated version of that spreadsheet process that now takes an hour a week to run. Right? So he picked a small specific problem and solved it using AI. And that's what I would advocate if you're interested in, starting to use this kind of capability. Make sure you identify your goal. Do you want to buy something or build something? Do you want to copy someone and remove them from a process or augment them and leave them in charge of it? Do you have data or do you need to start collecting it? Involve the right people at the very beginning. Involve the problem owners. Involve the data owners. And those are probably not necessarily the same group of people. And then finally, if you're going to build something new, involve data scientists, right? This is a group of people who's going to be able to take a business problem, translate it into modeling requirements, and ensure the data is available to build some sort of AI-based solution to solve that problem. What should you avoid? And this is the last thing I'll say since I see that I'm at time. I would avoid putting your head in the sand on this, right? AI is super fast moving and potentially very, very powerful. At the same time, I wouldn't get too excited, right? Don't say to yourself, oh, AI is so cool. We've got to use AI. What can we use AI for? That is a solution in search of a problem, which is unproductive. Instead, like as I said, right, find something small and specific, something that's annoying, and use AI to fix that small specific problem. So I'm going to stop there, and I will take whatever questions you might have.
I always have to have a question. I was listening to a report the other day on NPR about actually using AI in the intelligence community. And one of the things that they said was, well, we don't have to worry about some of that because everything that's in ChatGPT, The most recent was 2021. And so I guess my question is that sort of underlying bit of database, for lack of a better word, is that something that is dynamic? And so as things change and facts change, and does that change, or is it a point in time?
That's a great question. As a former intelligence officer, we're never called intelligence agents, just to be clear. Or as a former intelligence officer who spent 9 years at the CIA, I am very skeptical that they would be able to use ChatGPT for anything. It kind of in response to the larger meta issue there. The dynamic nature of the underlying data that was used to create ChatGPT. So I think Sam Altman, the CEO of of OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT, has asserted that it cost about $100 million to train ChatGPT. So that's not something that you're going to want to do, kind of every day. So even if you did have access to dynamic data sources, the cost to continually update 175 billion parameter on a server farm that generates like a non-trivial amount of, carbon dioxide would be like pretty extreme. So my sense is that the way that OpenAI is doing this is not to use some sort of continuously evolving dynamic data set, but rather to kind of train at intervals, right? And if you look on ChatGPT's website, I think what it says at the bottom is that it's currently using the May 24th version of the model. So on some fixed interval, I think what's happening is it's retraining the model, almost certainly because they've added extra information to the data set in some way. But the larger point that you made is right on, which is that the data set is going to be fixed, right, and end at some time point. And so any information that happens after that time point will not be incorporated into ChatGPT.
Thank you so much for your information and presentation so far. With your government background, I'd like to know how government agencies use artificial intelligence with what you're able to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, as a former CIA officer, I have insight into the intelligence community, which is a community that is not maybe a good one for me to share information and examples from, right? So, I'm happy to do a nice talk here, but I don't want to go to jail. So, I will tell you that. So, if I go back here to the phone example, right? Here you've got a whole bunch of machine learning systems, right? They're like one-off systems intended to solve specific problems. When I was at the agency, this is essentially how AI operated there, right? You'd have individual researchers solving one-off problems by building a model, and sometimes that model, actually at the beginning of my time there, usually you'd build a one-off model to use at one-off time, right? To inform one particular research paper that was going to go down to the president or to Congress or something like this. And then that model would be left, lying around. And at the end of my time there, they were starting to think about building kind of ongoing, living, enterprise-wide, kind of AI capabilities to solve problems like, all right, we want to be able to issue macroeconomic predictions for a given country with an off-the-shelf model like that, right? And so you'd have some sort of, continuously existing AI capability to do that. But that was an evolving capability. It's not like they had built some sort of, ChatGPT-like thing well ahead of OpenAI, and they were just keeping it secret from everybody.
Thank you. So today we have ChatGPT 3.5, and the future is Jarvis, right, and HAL 9000. So in your view, what are the next key milestones that we're going to see in the evolution of AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. Hopefully the future is more Jarvis and less HAL. But I think one of the key things from my perspective is when you look at Jarvis and HAL as they're fictitiously, as they're represented, right, fictitiously, they are adaptable, like self-adaptable, right? They choose their own kind of learning objectives. And like other pop culture kind of AIs, like Cortana from Halo or something, does the same thing, right? They're kind of self-guided, right? They self-adapt and choose what their learning objective is. All of these things, like on this iPhone here, right, or ChatGPT, none of those have that kind of self-adaptation. So I actually think that's one of the key things that has to happen is under the current paradigm, you have to have the ability for these algorithms to identify a new training problem and kind of build their own approach to training and learning against it, right? Currently, that's all human provided. But having the self-adaptation ability to do that is, I think, a necessary bridge between something that's just fixed and static, like all these things on the screen, and something like Jarvis or HAL.
Thank you. So continuing on that topic, don't you think autonomous vehicles are approaching that self-adaptability, self-awareness, and self sort of control?
I've never worked in the self-driving car space. My sense is that's an extremely difficult problem to solve, and what I kind of view as the lack of progress over the last 5 years in that space is an indicator of just how very difficult that problem is to solve. So approaching, I'm not sure. I also don't think that those are. I think you're probably right though to observe that those are compositions of multiple AI systems working together. What I don't think though is that they're in any sense self-adapting, right? They're not like self-learning on the fly. It's not like there's an AI in the Tesla car and it's saying, oh, look at this. There's a new sign I've never seen before. I need to build some sort of, kind of image recognition that can identify that sign and tell me what it does and this kind of thing. There's nothing like that as far as I know. Perhaps I'm wrong because I've never worked in self-driving cars, but I could see a follow-up.
What about the Mars rover?
What about the what?
Mars rover and the helicopter?
Yeah, again, that's not an area in which I have expertise, but I would suspect that whatever artificial intelligence is used to operate the Mars rover is sort of or at least when it was deployed, is antiquated at the current time.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm sure this could be a whole talk on its own, but do you have any thoughts on the use of AI in generating and disseminating misinformation?
I think that's serious. That's a big danger, right? That's a super dangerous thing. And it can happen in a couple of different ways, right? It can happen in the example that I gave with Arrow's theorem, right? That it tries to give you the right stuff and just messes up because it doesn't have the expertise, right, to within its corpus to be able to do the right thing and doesn't have the guardrails to prevent it from doing the wrong thing. I also think, though, that there's certainly plenty of opportunities here for bad actors to consciously, right, build systems that can generate misinformation. There is an entire class of models called generative adversarial networks that is aimed at detecting synthetically created data. And so I think you're right? There is it's a big topic, could be a talk in and of itself. There is a serious danger of people who want to do malicious things using these kind of capabilities to do exactly those things. But there's also pushback, right? There's also segments of the AI modeling space that's aimed at detecting and preventing that kind of stuff.
A lot of people go to college because they want to prepare for jobs. And a lot of people worry that artificial intelligence will steal jobs away and make people less valuable. They'll sort of like erode what humans are doing and make it harder for people to, find work. I was wondering what you tell students, or maybe do your students worry about what they should be majoring in? Is there any area that's not going to be disrupted and turned upside down by AI? If a kid's in college today, what should they be studying for the future?
Yeah, I think my sense is that there is no area that will not be in some way disrupted by something like a ChatGPT-esque capability. As for what people should be studying, right, at MSOE, as I'm sure Dr. Walls would tell you, or Saj, our students have a lot of focus, right? So they're focused on kind of engineering education and technical ability and stuff like that. At a kind of a bigger, like a UW-Madison, like I went to undergraduate, where you have maybe a lot more flexibility and choice in how you construct your earned expertise. I think for a student going to a place like that, I think there's a couple things that you want to consider focusing on, right? I think you'd want to consider trying to find a way to expose yourself to things like prompt engineering, right? So if I go here, right, the top thing here is my prompt, right? And the bottom thing is ChatGPT's response. Whoa, no OCR, thank you. And so this particular, you can see I've written this in a certain way, right? I've said, here's your role, here's your task, right? Here are details for your task. It is non-trivial to figure out how to change that to get exactly what you want, right? That is called prompt engineering, and I think it's probably going to be an emerging like field of kind of expertise, right? So for people going to college, right, one suggestion I would make is like, get yourself exposed to that kind of thing. I would also say that, kind of hand in hand with this, you probably want to understand a little bit about, some of this stuff here, right? How something like this is put together. So you can understand, like, here's something that's appropriate for me to ask, an AI assistant to do. Here's something that's not appropriate for me to ask an AI assistant to do. Write an email to my boss asking for a vacation, totally appropriate. Prove Arrow's theorem, totally inappropriate. The AI will fail.
Your focus today has been on ChatGPT, clearly the big dog, the OG of AI, if you will. And I'm wondering, though, which other players are in the arena now or on the horizon, including those from other countries?
So, yes, other countries. First of all, I would say that I think one of the lessons here is that ChatGPT is actually not the OG of AI, right? AI is quite old. And expanding that a little bit, actually Google and Microsoft and other companies have kind of equivalent large language models that they've simply made less accessible, right? Which is why you don't hear about them. So there's a number of kind of players in this market, and you'd recognize most of their names, right, as the big tech players. Again, because it costs $100 million to build something like this, so kind of the small players aren't really able to play effectively. Other countries, yeah, so when I was, let me optimize for a second. When I was at the agency, right, there was worry about a number of near-peer competitors to the US having capabilities in this area. I would worry about that, and I'm going to stop there.